right, we're back live with our third candidate for tonight. This is being done remotely, so we're going to do the best we can with the technology that we have. So, Michael, I'll turn this over to Bernie, and he'll introduce you. Michael?
Thank you. The third candidate is Michael Cramer. Michael has recently been working as a management consultant for Cape Fear Council of Government, but he had a 5-year tenure with the town of Carolina Beach, North Carolina, and approximately 2 or 3 years with Menominee, Michigan, which has some comparability to Southbridge in terms of its downtown area and some of the economic development opportunities that you're looking at here, and then a lengthy experience with the city of Greensboro, North Carolina. So again, comes highly recommended from his references, and again impressed the search committee in his preliminary interview. And I will turn it over to Chair for the first question, and welcome Mike to the meeting.
So, Michael, welcome to the town of Southbridge via this remote interview. In our last 2 rounds of interviews, we had all my colleagues on the council ask the questions, but given the limitations that we have with remote setups, something that we'd like to work on perhaps in the next fiscal year, because COVID-19 is definitely the new reality. So my colleagues, while you can't see them, there are 8 other members of the council. We have Councillor Joe Catrona, Councillor Gus Steves, Councillor Mike Marchetti, Councillor Jackie Ryan, Vice Chairman John Daniel. I think you've met him during the search. Councillor Joe Dow, Councillor David Adams, and Councillor Scott Lazo. So in the last round of interviews, every councillor had the opportunity to ask questions and also some follow-up. But unfortunately, again, because of the setup that we have, they see you behind me on the screen here in the town hall. This is being broadcast live through our YouTube channel as well as our cable access channel. So I'll be asking the questions. However, I may pause so that my colleagues, if they have a follow-up question like we did in the other round of interviews, they can pose a question. You probably won't be able to hear them, so I'll have to repeat back as best I can, but we will get our way through this. And that's why, fortunately, you're at the end of the evening, so if we have any technology glitches, we can work them out. So thank you again for being here. So we thank you for your interest in Southbridge and putting your name in. Could you please tell us the circumstances that have led you to look for a new position, how your qualifications and experience match up with the challenges and opportunities detailed in the position statement?
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to interview with y'all. I understand the constraints of the technology, and I can appreciate the difficulty of doing this remote. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do that, however. To answer your question, there's quite a few reasons why I'm interested in finding a new community. In the last municipal election that we had in Carolina Beach, we had a turnover of a long-serving mayor and a council member. And with their replacement on the board, the focus and the interest of the board changed. And the political dynamics were such that they were interested in finding new individuals to take the helm at Carolina Beach. Because of that, I was let go at the time and followed up and went to the Council of Government for the Cape Fear region, which is down in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's a regional planning center that helps do planning work and activities, management activities, and studies for all the local governments in that region of North Carolina. I worked for them for approximately 8-9 months, and my wife ended up finding a new position in Raleigh, North Carolina, and so I had to move out of their region. And because of that, I ended up leaving their employment and starting to look for other opportunities out as a town manager or a city manager. And what led me to looking at Southbridge was the fact that my wife and I are looking at finding a location that has Four Seasons outdoor recreational activities, has a good educational institutions, charming downtown area, has a good, strong council manager system, and respects and likes to have input from the public and from the staff on policy decisions and protocols. And that's sort of the reason why I started looking into Southbridge when your position came open. The things that kind of intrigued me about that fit in with that, that model is your parks and recreation system. You have quite a few park facilities, sports fields, trails, pools, hockey rinks, all that lead themselves to a outdoor lifestyle or a Four Seasons type recreational activities. You also have a wonderful downtown. In researching the community, it looks like you have some very historic and architectural buildings in the downtown, tree-lined walkable areas, and also restaurants and retail businesses in the downtown, which I think is highly important for any small community to have. And then also the community presence that the organization interacts with the public on. For instance, some of the festivals and the parades and so forth that you hold annually, which naturally this year may be a little bit different, really show a pride in community. And those are all reasons why my wife and I look for certain communities in certain areas to try and fulfill our interest in good government and a balanced way of life between work and home.
Thank you. This question would have been Councilor Lazo's question, and it's on the role of the town manager and its relationship with town council. Describe your understanding of the role of town manager within the town of Southbridge and your anticipated relationship with the town council, and describe the process you envision for working with the Southbridge Town Council to set goals and objectives.
Well, I think the last part of that question is particularly important. One of the things in my research that I look for in communities are communities that plan ahead. You have several different types of plans, master plans, comprehensive plans, parks and recreation plans. And what I like to do as a support system for the council and the organization as a whole is work to try and facilitate planning processes that give the community an idea of where the organization wants to go. I think setting those goals and having a specific plan in mind are extremely important. It also makes it very easy on handling budget situations or budget season because you're able to go and look at the priorities of the organization, of the community itself, and the council to determine where things ought to be headed from a budgetary and fiscal management standpoint. For me, town manager is really a facilitator. They are sort of a go-between for support with the council in making policy decisions, with the staff in researching and implementing policy decisions, and then with the public in trying to educate the public on what is going on with the community through those policies or procedures or the operational components. So really I see it very much as a hub type system where the town manager is a facilitator and supports all of those activities that go on to function in a good government society.
Any follow-up questions? Councilor Marchetti? If you... I'm sorry, what was that? Well, no, the mics have to be turned down to have it, so just repeat it. I didn't know that. Sorry. So a question from Councilor Marquetti is, do you work well with other councilors, and how does that, your relationship with councilors, so how do you see that working within a management town council form of government?
Well, I think it's extremely important to have good, strong, positive relations with all of the councilors and also with the staff and the general public. I spend a lot of time on trying to build specific relationships with individuals, trying to make it so that we have a good common working framework that we can build off of. I see myself as being very outgoing and personable, and I enjoy the interaction of dealing with council members and discussing policy or procedures or operations or whatever the topic is. And I find that is very enriching so that we can get a more full range of discussion and options out on the table for council overall. So I tend to do very well in a personal type of setting where I interact often and frequently with the council.
Thank you. This question is on leadership and management style, which was presented to the other two candidates by Councilor Adams. As our town manager, your leadership and management skills will most likely be challenged in a wide range of areas, such as dealing with natural and/or health emergencies, personnel and personality differences, both internally and externally, cultural diversity, economic and infrastructure matters that are specific to our town, and a variety of other topics. Based on your experience and in a general answer, how do you approach these variety of issues both as a leader and as a manager?
Well, I think from my perspective, those are all things that happen in most every community that I've been a part of. The key to making sure that you have a good answer to the question regarding any particular policy or procedure or issue or topic is the time that you put into researching. And that's one of the things that I find is a strong suit of mine. I do quite a bit of research. I look at various options. I interact with various people, whether it's staff members, council members, general public, to try and pull information out to provide a holistic approach to dealing with those particular issues. I think in my management style, being as out front and personable as I am, I tend to get a lot of information provided to me, which helps me go and provide that to the council in making decisions and moving things forward. It's always difficult to handle each one of those different types of situations, but I think the key is good communication and positive responses and trying to educate the person that you're talking to about those various issues so that a decision or at least a consensus can be built for moving forward on those topics. Does that answer your question?
I a follow-up to that, though, and doing some research on yourself, you've had obviously natural disasters in the area that you had worked with. As given your form of government down there, I was kind of interested in how that worked. I wasn't sure how your role as the manager was relative to the council and I believe mayor. So as far as the leadership of the town during those natural emergencies, what was your role in that?
Generally for North Carolina, we're set up in a situation where the council sets the policies and procedures dealing with a natural disaster. For instance, they will be the ones that direct an evacuation or put a curfew out or ban weapons of some sort or something of that nature, some reaction to the actual event. The actual operations of handling all of the phone calls, the interaction between the police department and the fire department, the work for stormwater issues or rainfall problems, All of that is run through the operational hub, which is the town manager as the operations center manager. And in that, we go through an EOC or operations center type of process. For the most part, North Carolina uses the NIMS or National Incident Management System that is used by the federal government, in that the council handles the policy decisions on setting priorities. The manager goes and implements those priorities, and typically there is sort of a marrying of the responsibility when it comes to explanation and discussions with the public on the topic.
Thank you. Okay, on finance, which was Councilor Steve's question, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that local communities need to be more fiscally flexible and that our long-distance supply chain system may not be reliable enough to meet our needs. Yet we still have big-ticket items and issues to address, such as providing basic services, maintaining public infrastructure, improving roads and facilities, as well as handling stormwater. Please give us some examples on how you have balanced such fiscal needs with ecological reality and get the citizens to support making the community more resilient for the long term.
Well, I will say this, that I don't think any of us have really dealt, any of us in this industry have really dealt with a pandemic quite like COVID-19. I think the closest thing that I can come to for an example is like we were just talking about in hurricane and disaster preparedness. Very similar to COVID-19, you still have things where you have to go and meet the needs of the public. Water and sewer capacity during a hurricane, whether there's life and safety, public safety, fire protection, stormwater issues. All of those things are areas that you have to deal with even during an emergency. And the key is to spend time preparing for those activities and planning for them so that you can get ahead of what you need before an event occurs. In this case with the pandemic, it's sort of uncharted territory, so to speak. We haven't seen something like this in a good 100 years or so. So I think we sort of let our guards down. But in natural disasters and other types of things, we spend quite a bit of time on making sure that we have all the proper equipment, that we have the training that's necessary, and that we stockpile those types of resources along with fiscal resources to go and better manage situations when it comes to a natural disaster. Does that help?
Councilor Steve? Yep. I think, I'm sure there'll be circle back questions. I'll have them write them down, and towards the end, maybe they can hand them to me and we can go through that. That might be easier to do that. So if councilors have specific on these topics, just to keep the flow going, and then they can hand me the questions and we can have a dialogue on that, if that's okay with the council. Just make it easier. All right, so we'll get back to overrides. That may be part of project management, so we'll get back to that. Alternative revenues and grants. This is a question Councilor Daniel had. Like most Massachusetts communities, Southbridge is very dependent upon property taxes as its major source of revenue for services and capital investments, which can put a strain on residential taxpayers. What experience do you have with creative forms of revenue?
Well, in my situation and my experiences, not only in North Carolina but in Michigan, there's a lot of other ways that you can supplement that revenue for property taxes and help offset some of the pain or discomfort to property taxpayers. Some of those things are state and federal grants. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with both state and federal grants is the strings that are attached. The strings may not be monetary, they could be reporting. They could be internal and expenses that you have to manage because you're managing the funds and the project itself. So there's various things that you have to weigh when you accept a grant, but there are many different types of grants out there for different infrastructure-related project primarily. On top of that, there are a lot of community development type projects and programs where you can do financing, either loans or grants with various programs. For instance, I helped with a economic development program in Menominee where we utilized resources from the state of Michigan's housing development fund and also the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to go and marry funding up so that a developer could reapportion or redo a building that was a manufacturing building into a live-work type unit where we had 54 apartments and 3 businesses in the establishment. So there's a lot of different programs that are out there that, as long as you have an understanding and a connection to who handles those funds and what those funds require, that you can go and use those to help subsidize some of the taxpayer initiatives that you normally would have in infrastructure maintenance and other types of programs throughout the community. It's never 100%, and there is always some level of matching that's involved, but it is a much better way to go and garner support and revenue for specifically infrastructure type projects.
I just have a follow-up question to that. When you talk a lot about federal and state grants. Granted, you've worked in other states, so the federal might not be so difficult. But as far as being a candidate that has no experience in Massachusetts, how would you overcome any of the pitfalls that they may have to get up to speed? That a town like Southbridge has so many challenges. That how would you get up to speed to make those contacts a reality?
Well, I think utilizing the wisdom and the knowledge of the council would be my first venture into it, and that would be in trying to find people to contact and discuss and learn from about the various funding options that may be out there and special to Massachusetts compared to any other community. The inner workings of organizations like the state, your League of Municipalities, other types of town manager or city manager organizations are good points of reference to start talking to and determine how to go and get that information. It's something I would definitely have to get up to speed with, but it is something that I do very well, is go through the research and learn things quite quickly.
So next question was Councilor Catrona with project management. Could you please tell us about any significant municipal projects you have managed in your past role?
Boy, the question isn't can I, it's which one should I choose to tell you about. I guess I'll give you an example of one that I managed in Carolina Beach. When I got to Carolina Beach, they had approximately 20 to 25 capital improvement projects that they had yet to implement, that they had planned or started down the road of implementing. One of the most important was replacement or upgrade of their water and sewer lines. The community had some areas of town that were 70 to 100 years old in the infrastructure that was underground, and they hadn't prepared to go and do total upgrade and maintenance of those. What I did is I took their plans and worked with the council to explain to them what things needed to be accomplished and get a priority list of projects and items that needed to be accounted for. And naturally, the major issue in doing that was not the planning of the project management as much as the financing of those projects. What we ended up doing is going out for revenue bonds, because water and sewer funds are enterprise funds and they're utilities and basically set their rates. we were able to use revenue bonds to go and pay for the upgrades. And one of the projects that we started with was a section of the town where we replaced all the water, sewer, streets, sidewalks, and stormwater utilities all at one shot, trying to make it so the public was only negatively impacted once, and hopefully the community goes away and another 70 years goes by and we don't touch that street or that infrastructure in those areas. One of the keys to making that project work was being hand in hand with the public that was most affected, being able to go out and sit down and talk with property owners that were going to be impacted, and to make sure that they were aware of what types of things were going to take place and how long it was going to be. Dealing with those projects, we were able to accomplish in that time frame that I was at Carolina Beach in that 5 years, all 25 of those capital improvement projects being implemented in a successful way.
So as a follow-up to that, how did you manage the organization and yourself to stay on top of the myriad issues and projects to make sure that they got accomplished?
I tend to be very organized and particular about how I particularly manage projects, but for the most part, I walked into an organization that contracted out their engineering services and much of their project management. So what I ended up being in most cases was a go-between between the organization as a whole and our contractors as project managers to make sure that tasks were being done at certain times, that we were on target for our time delivery or on budget, and any issues that were brought up that were going to create problems for that budget or that timeline, that I brought that to the council and was able to explain what was going on in that situation. We also had various individuals, department heads, that I utilized as experts in the field. Our operations manager, so to speak. He was out doing inspections on project sites during the water and sewer projects because he had a certain expertise that we could use to make sure that things were getting done appropriately. So in my case, I utilized all the resources I had available, outside consultants, internal staff, and also my own time and experience to go and deal with the project management activities of those projects.
And I know Councilor Catrona has asked this question, I think, and hopefully I can paraphrase it correctly. One of the biggest projects that we have probably pending in the town of Southbridge right now is our fire station building project. What do you see your role as the town manager in seeing that project from where it is right now to completion and possible funding by the town?
Well, I'll say this, that all of the projects that typically a new manager inherits, the way that I go about project management is to collect every piece of document that I can and understand the project from the very beginning of time through to where I have walked in the door. I find that very critical and important to do, to make sure that in case things were, I don't want to say misrepresented, but misunderstood as the project was evolving, that I can go and ask the probing questions to make sure that I get those issues corrected and move the project along. I tend to be a champion for trying to make sure that things are on time, on budget, and are done appropriately. And because of that, if the fire station is one of those major priorities that are under construction now, it'd be one of my priorities to make sure that I was on top of and understood so I could help and give direction and guidance if my expertise was needed in that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back to Councilor Steve's question because we're not even in the construction phase right now. We would be in, design, project design and proposed location, but it would most likely require an override or a debt exclusion for this project. What is your experience in that? And if you did have experience in overrides, how did you get the public to buy in? And if it failed at the ballot, how would you change direction or help guide the council in that direction for that needed infrastructure project?
Well, to date, I haven't been directly involved in any communities that have a Proposition 2.5 override like Massachusetts has. However, I think in any of these projects, what you look to do is outline what the particular needs are for the project, identify where the benefits are coming from, and why it needs to be constructed in the way that it's being constructed. If something like that is a bond initiative, so to speak, or a voter approval initiative fails, I think you have to have multiple different options in your back pocket to say, okay, if we do this and we failed at this, what's our next line of attack? What's our plan B or C or D? And how do we address the particular needs that we have in the community for, in this case, a new fire station? I think that begins your next round of work, which is trying to find another option to go and move the organization forward on meeting their particular needs.
So do you have any particular experience in bond issues or anything like that, the issuance of bonds?
I have done bond issuance. All of the bond issuance in Michigan and North Carolina that I've done have been general bonds, ones that were not required to be voter approved. But the same type of process really applies, where you have to have all the information available in order to go and request that approval, whether the approval is from the council or whether the approval is from the general public. The key is it makes it much more difficult to try and explain and communicate all the pros and cons and benefits and the needs for such a project to such a large demographic as your population of 17,000 or so.
Thank you. Next question was on economic development. Councilor Dow had asked this question. Can you describe your economic development experience with specific examples about how you attracted business growth and retention? And would any of these ideas work in Southbridge?
I would hope that a lot of the ideas would be universal. I've done quite a few economic development projects in my time as a town and city manager. I mentioned the one from Menominee where we took a manufacturing facility and basically turned that into a live-work unit with 54 apartments and 3 businesses on the ground floor. That was done by utilizing resources that were out there from the state and the federal government, and also just working to find organizations and developers that did that type of work in historic downtowns. Other things that I've been able to accomplish as economic development status is going in, implementing tax abatement programs in Michigan where we needed to go and entice or encourage businesses to come into our industrial park, or perform certain types of expansions of existing businesses and how they relate to the number of jobs. At various points in time when I was in Menominee, we added approximately 20,000 square feet of manufacturing and industrial facilities, 53 jobs, and $7.4 million worth of private new investment into the community, just because of our efforts trying to locate or pull businesses in or provide an avenue for them to expand and improve. In Carolina Beach, I did a large project or led the project attempting to get a new oceanfront hotel to go in next to our downtown business district on the ocean. That was a $15 million project And we did a lot of work as a community trying to spruce up the downtown and the boardwalk district and improve the infrastructure there so that when that new hotel came in, everything was fresh and new, and we had a grand opening that really started the ball rolling, and we received over that time frame approximately $75 million worth of investment in other parts of the community that were spurred on because of the way that we managed our downtown and the new development that was there. A lot of those ideas and those ways of handling economic development are not all that innovative. They're things that have been done before and should be able to be done in Southbridge. The key is identifying what your goals are, whether it's employment or whether it's manufacturing or service industry, and then trying to show what the positive aspects of the community are to entice businesses to come or expand in your location.
So, as a follow-up, you talked a little bit about downtown, your downtown area. That is a primary focus of our economic development, and bringing businesses also to the town's industrial parks. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on the specific experience with the projects similar to that? I know you talked about it a little bit. And specifically to Southbridge, has any of your research led you to how you would tackle those projects for Southbridge specifically?
I can't say that any of them were, the research that I've done so far has been specific enough to give recommendations or areas of interest. The one example that I have with the Oceanfront Hotel in Carolina Beach, years before this hotel was a interest, their downtown or their boardwalk district was almost blighted. And the infrastructure in that area, water, sewer, stormwater, sidewalks, power, communication, were all very run down and not maintained very well. So part of what I did is go out to the businesses in that area and talk to them about what things that they saw as needs in the area and what could contribute to our improvement of the area to entice that hotel to come in and build during that same 12 months that we were going and doing renovations. As a community, we were able to come together and determine that we did have the need to go and do the infrastructure improvements. We had the resources, and that what we needed was the project planning and delivery aspects. And that's where I came in and took charge of managing the delivery aspects of those projects so that all of those improvements, all of those investments from the public standpoint would be recouped by the new investment by the hotel. And in our case, we had a room occupancy tax which helped fund quite a bit of our improvements for our downtown. Now, that's a very specific example to one downtown, but I think things are very similar in most downtowns where you have to look for what the core needs are in the community and then look for ways that you can go and support those core needs to encourage development or redevelopment of certain spaces or areas in the downtown.
One of the challenges that we have is limited highway access. How would you tackle that and address it with that as you envision development of a downtown or the community itself?
Well, I would imagine that quite a bit of the difficulties that you have are dealt with, as you said, in the transportation area, and possibly discussions and negotiations with Massachusetts Department of Transportation could be a way to go and get into that area to find ways to increase pass-through traffic. There's other also things that you could do just from a perspective of advertising and presentation. Information on a highway and signage something that attracts people to get off the side of the road and move into your downtown. Those are all things that you can look at to try and encourage pass-through traffic that you may not be getting now because of infrastructure need.
Okay. Thank you. The next question from Councilor Marchetti was based on citizen relations and transparency. Southbridge is a community with much diversity, which includes a significant Latino population. What is your experience in working with these populations? How would you work to engage citizens in the issues of town government and help to build a stronger sense of connection and community?
We had in Carolina Beach a area of our beach that was a ride-on beach. So you could bring your vehicle, go park on the beach, you could camp on the beach, and that was a very inexpensive way to get a lot of people coming into the community. One of the demographics that came to that area, because it was so attractive and inexpensive, was a large Hispanic population that would use the area primarily as meeting space or group space for families. That was very difficult on the facility themselves because it increased trash, it increased traffic, it increased other issues dealing with translations on rules and regulations for the park and for the beach. One of the things that I did to try and improve the situation is I ended up reaching out to Hispanic organizations in the area, mainly in the Wilmington area, which is a large metropolitan area close by Carolina Beach, to find locations that we could talk to and educate individuals in that community about the rules, regulations, and how to go and work in that framework of that beach and that public access area. Quite a few of our initiatives took the form of hiring police officers that were bilingual. I am not bilingual, so I wasn't able to go out and help, but we were able to get interns from a program in the University of Wilmington to come down and work to pass out brochures that were in Spanish and that they would explain the rules and regulations to. And really what it did was it was an outreach program to try and bring them more into the fold of understanding what we were after for the beach and what they were needing for services for the beach in that area. And it was a very good relationship by the time that we left. It does take quite a bit of time to reach out to certain populations like that because many of them are resistant to government interference or contact for various different reasons.
And I think I'll paraphrase my good friend Councilor Lauser's question, I think he's asked of every candidate at this point, was in regards to citizen relations. A lot of our constituents ask, while it's not required in the charter at its present time, and obviously you live out of state, where do you plan on taking up residency if you were so chosen to be the next town manager?
Well, I will say that there's a lot of positive things that I've learned about Southbridge. There are a few things that are a little bit concerning, and one of them is housing. In just my look on the internet, rental housing is pretty scarce in Southbridge. New home builds are relatively scarce. Homes that are available in a certain price range are somewhat scarce. So really my interest is trying to be part of the community, and I would much rather prefer be in the community itself and feel the same pain, so to speak, as the other taxpayers in the community. But most likely it will take a good 6 to 12 months to get permanent residency in the community itself. In the meantime, I most likely would be renting in some area.
Okay, thank you. The last question we had from Councilor Ryan was relationship with other town state entities such as the schools, independent councils, committees. Currently, the Southbridge Public Schools are under the jurisdiction of a state-appointed receiver. What do you see as the town manager's role in working with the receiver and the school department? And what type of relationships have you developed with state government and other stakeholders that would be beneficial to the town?
Well, let me start by saying I think the intergovernmental relationship aspect is extremely important. It's an area that I tend to work on specifically with the various members of the community. So for instance, in the case of Carolina Beach, we had an intergovernmental relationship with the federal government, the state government, and the county government to provide sand on the beach as a protection for coastal storm damage through hurricanes. And this was a program that the community had been involved in for about 50 years. When I got there, I knew absolutely nothing about that particular program and how the regulations or the enabling legislation work. So what I did is I went to the people that were the experts. I went to the Army Corps of Engineers, talked to them, found out information, researched, read up on old reports and programs, went to the state and talked to the water quality folks that managed that part of the program and did the same thing with them. Learned the aspects of the legislation, the enabling legislation that allowed us to do these types of things. And then I worked with each individual municipality in the county that had these programs to kind of learn and understand what they knew about it and the financing from the county. By going out and touching all these places and talking to all these stakeholders, I was able to gather enough information to go and start performing more like a subject matter expert in meetings and negotiations with the organizations and less like someone that didn't know anything about the program. I can see it being very much like that in dealing with the school systems. In having a receivership and a organization that helps to manage that aspect with the community schools themselves in the area, I would see myself as sort of, once again, a support system to try and help provide any sort of wisdom, advice, or counsel that I could, or direction in trying to make sure that the receivership goes the way that it should and the organization comes out of its receivership and that we meet certain goals and tasks. So I see myself very much as a team player in that regard, much less as a specific expert. I will tell you that in my situation, I have never managed a school district. In North Carolina and in Michigan, the school systems are part of the county organizations and not part of the municipal organizations, no matter how large or small they may be.
So as a follow-up to that, because education is very passionate to several members of the council here, including our newly elected council member, Ms. Ryan, who served just as the chairman of the school committee, and myself, as well as Councilor Lazo, have also served in that capacity on the school side. This receivership is something that we look at where the state really doesn't have a, as my colleague Councilor Lazo says, a dismount plan. While as chair, I work with the receiver. What do you see your role as town manager to work with the state-appointed receiver to get the school district to the end point, as well as work with the duly elected school committee members who don't have a relationship with the receiver, not through fault of really their own, but to build a relationship in the capacity so that, one, the state can dismount from Southbridge, but have the local governance that we know how to do?
Well, I don't want to come off as knowing everything about your particular situation by a very specific answer in this regard, but I think where my talents lie that could facilitate that activity is by pulling together that information and developing that dismount plan. I think if the state is unable to, or does not have the ability, or has not taken the lead to come up with a plan itself for a dismount of how to get from where you're at now to a fully functioning school system, the key is for the local government to do that themselves, to bring that information and a plan to the state. Honestly, one state government is not a whole lot different than the other. If it's easy on the state, it'll be easy on the local government. Meaning, if you can go and take a package to them and say, hey, this is what we think this should look like, more than likely, they're going to accept much, if not all of that, because they no longer have to do the work in planning it. Now, that may seem very skeptical way to look at things, but it's also a very practical way of looking at them. That if you can't get help from somebody else, you need to take that mantle on yourself. And I think collectively as an organization in the school system, the local government, and the general public, that's something you could do to easily pull together a plan of exit for that type of an issue.
Did I encompass your question okay, Councilor Brown? Did I encompass your... Catch the as this? Okay, before we close, does anybody have any written questions that you... Let's just grab it. The one on the top. Okay. Okay. Councilor Ryan had a follow-up on finance. I forgot this one. Thank you, Councilor Ryan, for reminding. Massachusetts gives localities the option of having a single or split tax rate. A split rate would tax local business more than residents' home. Have you had any experience with this form of taxation, and would it be something you would consider for Southbridge?
I haven't personally had any experience dealing with split taxation rates. Most of the taxation laws that I have worked under have been assessed value rates with one standard of rating the value for commercial or residential, just different property attributes within them. However, in each one of the states, we have had some level of a homestead exemption, for the lack of a better term. Something where a residential property owner gets some level of a break on their primary residence, and thus sort of tips the scales, so to speak, on taxation rates compared to residents and commercial business. Would I recommend something like that? I would have to honestly know more about it and provide the council with the options involved and the pros and cons for that before I would make a recommendation for any community.
Thank you. Going back to communication and transparency and projects, could you expound on a couple projects maybe in your past that you had some issues with in communication, and make sure that people are informed, and what you do to overcome that issue?
Sure. In Carolina Beach, when I got there, one of the projects that they had already started, and this is sort of comical now that I've heard some of your other questions, was the development of a fire station. In that capacity, they had plans and engineers and engineered products on already through the process, and they had yet to go and implement with a particular construction firm to build the complex. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat was that although they had mentioned and talked about the improvements that were needed at the fire station, one of the things that they never did was to go out to the public and discuss in detail why it was needed, what types of things were needed, what the benefits would be if the community had those items, and then explain and get reaction from the public. Have sort of an interactive session of discussion and answers and topics. Because of that, I wouldn't move forward on the project. What I insisted on is give me a month, let me go and set up town hall meetings with the engineers, talk to the citizenry, and create a spot on our website where all the information was collected and provided that documented the project itself. By doing this, what I feel we got out of it was buy-in. Although not 100% of the people really thought we needed an expansion of the fire station to the tune of a couple of $1 million, they at least understood the project and the ramifications of it and the information that led to council's decision to authorize it and then the construction of the project itself. So I think the key in any project management is communicating the information first, not after the decision's been made, but as a starting point, include the public in on these activities and these interests in different types of projects. Now, they may not have a lot of interest or understanding of the projects, but at least you've provided them the opportunity to communicate with the local government about the goals and objectives of that project, and it doesn't come as a surprise to them. That to me is the worst thing you can do, is surprise the public on any sort of initiative.
And just as a follow-up, because Google is a tool. This council also, and I know I had seen it. Could you just talk a little bit about that beach dredging project and the communication on that? Because obviously that's going to be the key. Any council or any citizen out there that's watching you is going to go right to Google and say, hey, this was an issue. I want to give you the opportunity to discuss it while you're here, if you so choose. It's entirely up to you.
And I appreciate that very much. You're right. There is very little good that you find in social media or online, but a whole lot of bad that you can find. In the case of the Carolina Beach Lake dredging, the project had been in the works for more than 10 years before I got there. It was a 11-acre lake that had never been dredged and was used as a stormwater retention pond for more than a third of the community. Every time it rained hard or a hurricane came by, various neighborhoods would flood. So the community, as I said, 10 years prior, had started looking into ways to go and implement a dredging project in this lake. When I got there, it was communicated to me that all permits were in hand, and I saw the permits. All of our approvals for disposal of the material on property that the town leased were in hand, and that the only thing that was really left before we could implement the project was the financing. How do we go and pay for such a large project? I ended up pulling that into some of our other water and sewer revenue bonds and using revenue bonds to pay for the dredging of the lake. During that time, I allowed the person who was project management over that project continue on with all the details. And we got about 6 months into the project, halfway through, and we found out that we didn't have written permission to put the spoils on the property. We had verbal. We didn't have all the permits because the permitting agencies never reviewed the environmental documents, and the permit institutions were from the state. They had approved things, but they hadn't read the material. And what we found out halfway through the project is we weren't supposed to be placing the material there where we did because we didn't have written approval, and the soil that we placed there had arsenic in it. Not a very good situation to be funded. What I learned from that experience is that I need to do more in the way of trust but verify. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned early on in learning and collecting as much information as you can about a project, even if it's historical and it's been handed down to you from other people or project managers, is that the key is people told me what they knew, and what they knew had been handed down to them, and what they knew had been handed down to them, and somewhere along the way things were lost in translation. So the presentations that I made saying we had these approvals were accurate only in the respect of I trusted the people that provided me with the information, but I didn't verify it before I actually utilized it. So that's where, in a management setting, you can do everything you can do to make a successful project, but still have a difficult project that you have to learn from. And that's the types of things that I learned from in that project.
Well, thank you for your honesty on that. I appreciate it. I think we all have projects that we learn from and overcome, and as long as we use it as a learning experience, it's always a good thing. So, any other questions? So, in closing, again, thank you very much for being here tonight. And I apologize we started a little late and we had a little bit of a technology issue, but I think I told Bernie we'd be done at 9:30, so we're well ahead of schedule. So, I think we did a good job on that. I hope we did anyway. So, is there any closing remarks that you want to give to the council and the community? Because this is broadcast over our cable access and YouTube, as to thoughts or any questions that you have of us at council first.
Well, I guess I want to thank you again for the opportunity. I've enjoyed speaking to you, even in this remote setting. As I said at the beginning, I've educated myself quite a bit on the organization and the community, and Southbridge does seem like a place where my family and I would fit in very well. There's a lot of learning to do, but I enjoy the learning aspect of being in local government. And it's something that I do well. So I hope that you give me the opportunity, or that you see the value in the experiences that I've had and communicated to you tonight. And one way or the other, I wish you all the best of luck.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for being here tonight. So what will happen from here is Thursday night we have another council meeting at 6:30 to discuss all the interviews, because given the lateness of this, I've been on other searches, and typically we go right afterwards and try to make a decision, but I think this is a very important decision for the town. We'll reflect on it, and we'll meet back on Thursday, and one way or another you will know our decision. So thank you very much. Best of luck to you and your family. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. You have a good night.
Thank you. All right. See none? Thursday night, 6:30. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous, all present. Thank you.